Hello, everybody, and really happy to meet you. I'm just going to say, genau, exactly what Misha said. I'm totally agree with that. My name is Alexandra. I'm a program manager in Misha already made like a small introduction, at least from my understanding. So I'm leading the Oracle modernization space, and as well as I made some contributions to SQL modernization as well. So if you're using today's Q recommendations or DMA, SKU recommendation was built by my team as well. So you can expand the chapter for the questions, but today we're going to look a little bit about at Oracle migrations. So can I take the scene right now, Misha, and share my screen?
Sure, feel free.
Yeah, okay, great. Now let me see what apologies for the English. I wish I would know more German words. I promise to improve my vocabulary until next time. Please feel free to, I don't want this to be a monologue, so ask questions. I'm happy to take questions at any point in time. We are here after work. Well, I'm still going to work a little bit more tonight, but I hope everybody is off work right now. So this is just a friendly conversation about Oracle migrations. And what's friendly about Oracle? Well, they haven't been too friendly, to be honest, with their customers. And one of the strategies that Oracle has not pursued in time was their journey to cloud. So that's one of the parts that Oracle has missed out in the early phases. And although in terms of popularity, what does popularity mean? Popularity means that this engine, people with these skills have references on the net, there are discussion threads on Oracle. So although it was consistently ranked as number one of popularity, in terms of most used and desired database engines is ranked number 10 right now. And that comes from a Stack Overflow 2021 survey. We all live the era of the big digitalization project and of course transformation to cloud. And there are several reasons for that. I'm not gonna go for those reasons, but what's important is that databases are also evolving to cloud technologies. And even Oracle, they sort of adjusted their predictions, and now they estimate that 80% of all enterprise and mission critical workloads will move to the cloud by 2025. So what can we do about it? Because customers right now, they have a lot of choices in terms of cloud, and you have a lot of choices as well in terms of cloud. So what is the best place for this migration? And the answer is one size does not fit all here. And there's an assessment that has to be done at workload level to understand what would be the best target. But even before looking at the assessment, what's driving people to move out of Oracle? For a long time, we've had it as sort of like a do not touch database, which I do believe was a little bit not correlated with the facts. But now we've seen a lot of people moving out completely out of Oracle in terms of data center migration, not just workload migrations. Cost has always been one of the drivers in the past, and the licensing model has also been challenging for certain customers who are looking to acquire those licenses. But it's not just about that. There is a huge need for innovation and modernization. Everybody would like to have a all-in sort of capabilities within the database. If we go back like 10 or 12 years when I started working in the data platform space, the discussions were about indexes and optimizations and 10DB and where to put the files and so on. Most of those topics are left behind today because there's no need for that. We see a lot of ML being injected into the DB engine itself. We see a lot of data analytics capabilities being injected within the DB engine itself. So while I still believe relational database engines are going to be there for a while, they have evolved and transformed. And that's what customers are looking for in terms of modernization. Another common factor that comes up in this conversation is related to the data center contracts. These were sort of 4 to 5 years contracts, or some of them were long-term contracts, but they have an expiration point or a renewal point. And that's one of the main triggers for customers who are looking to move into the cloud space. On top of course, the hardware. Even if you get the latest and the greatest, I remember when I was installing terabyte servers, servers with 2 or 4 terabytes memory 7 years ago. Really powerful machines, and I was like, this is the state of the art. It's not gonna get any better. And now the baseline are terabytes databases or petabytes databases. So technology is evolving as well, and aging hardware, it's something that it's you can't avoid it. It's just a question of when rather than if. With all that being said, we need to think about where are we going to move. So we have all these drivers, we have all these challenges. So what can we do? Well, the proposal that we have is to modernize your Oracle migrations to the Azure space. But where should I go? Because Azure data is so complex and you have so many options in terms of target. Even if we triage down to relational database engine, we have PostgreSQL, we have Azure SQL DB, we have managed instance, VMs, Synapse, and on top of that, the common engine for part of these PaaS services, which is SQL Server itself. So where should I go? And here I'm going to come back to the previous answer where I said one size does not fit all. There are certain workloads that are better fitted for Postgres. There are other workloads which are better fitted for SQL DB or managed instance. So let's say I locked in my target and I know I want to go for Postgres. I went for an assessment. I sort of reviewed the workload, but the question is, what are the steps and how I'm going to get there? We know this was a very target-centric documentation. When we joined the team, we were looking at, oh, if you want to move to Azure SQL DB, this is how you do it, or to manage instances, this is how you do it. But it was not focused on the source. So we built the Azure Database Migration Guides. You can find them at datamigration.microsoft.com with a source-focused target. Instead of first looking at your target, we are highlighting the source. Where are you coming from? And let's build the migration paths for all possible targets based on your source. So have a look. It's pretty. We try to put as many steps as possible to cover the entire migration space from the early phases until from assessment, conversion, data movement, as well as data validation. So Oracle to Azure has different flavors or scenarios or possibilities. I would just talk about the 3 most possible options with a focus on Oracle to Azure SQL. So that's one of the scenarios that we are going to use in this migration space. Oracle to PostgreSQL is another scenario, as well as Oracle to Infra. Not all workloads are the same. They don't have the same requirements and the same specifications. So when looking at the right target, while looking for the right target, we have to sort of analyze the current workloads and understand what's the best fit for us. In the Oracle to Azure SQL or Microsoft SQL modernization journey, there are different phases. Although we would like to have it as one-click button, in reality, it's a combination of tools and scripts. The main phases that we are looking for in a migration process are discovery and SSS plan. While we currently do not have a scale discovery component in Azure Migrate, we do have some discovery script and SSMA that's going to help in the assess and plan phase. We are also looking at building some new capabilities in the assessment, and we are sort of trying to streamline that user experience and have a single pane view for our customers from ADS. So you can use SQL Server Migration Assistant. It's a tool that comes in 5 flavors: Oracle to SQL, Sybase to SQL, DB2 to SQL, MySQL to SQL, and Access to SQL. You can download and install for free the version of the tool that you would need to use in your modernization journey. And that can help you through the assess, convert, and remediate phase, as well as schema and data migration. In the data migration space, with SQL Server Migration Assistant, you can tackle the small to medium workload. So if you're gonna look at terabytes, petabytes of data that you want to move, we may have different options, and I'm gonna address that a little bit later during the presentation. But we've talked a lot about data, but what about applications? Because databases don't stand on their own. They are part of an ecosystem. They are part of a solution that covers applications as well. Data Access Migration Toolkit is a Visual Studio Code extension that can help you identify the data access APIs in your code. It will not lift and shift your Java to C# or Java to web apps in Azure, but it's going to help you identify connection strings, dynamic PL SQL queries, as well as T-SQL, and it's going to help you estimate the effort of updating and, of course, maybe even changing some of the data access APIs that you are currently using. So what does the tool actually do? In the pre-migration phase, it is pretty powerful in terms of reports. And these reports focus on schema conversion. When we talk about heterogeneous migrations, a lot of effort goes into converting objects, even if you talk about synonyms or tables or stored procedure or indexes or constraints or packages, from one engine to the other. And that's not just for databases, it's for any heterogeneous migration. If we talk about converting Java to C# or C# to Java, you're going to come across the same challenges. Most of the time, there's a manual work involved. So we try to automate and streamline as much as possible. But there are things that do not map one-on-one between these two systems. And those are the topics that need to be sort of manually assessed or manually converted. Our goal is to automate as much as possible and reduce the manual effort percentage to the minimum. Another sort of functionality of the tool, and I'm not going to spend a lot on the slides because I would really like to rather focus on the demo, is migrating the schema. Is migrating the correct word? Well, I wouldn't say. It's rather deploying the converted schema to your target, and as well as moving the data. And we'll talk about the data movement options and what you can do in that space. When we look at data movement, we have sort of two big streams. Offline data movement, where we're just going to read whatever it's currently on your server and bring it to your target. And online data movement. Online data movement, it's a concept that we sort of wrapped around change data capture. So while this migration process may take, the offline data movement may take 3 weeks, your original source might still be up, and you might be making changes, inserting data into that system. So how am I going to get those changes and bring them to the target for the duration of this synchronization period until I'm gonna hit the cutover option. Well, we don't have a simple story for that. For the online data movement, we rely on third-party solutions. We can leverage third-party solutions, as well as a component which is called Oracle CDC, is part of the SQL Server Integration Services. You can run that in your on-prem environment, or you can run that in Azure Data Factory integration runtime. Databricks and Databox, well, Databricks can be used as well for data. I would even say if you have a component where you would need to make changes or transform the data, Databricks can be an option. While Databox is, as the name says, a huge box that we are going to ship to your data center to move large amount of data. So the box gets to your environment. You're going to load the data within that data box, and then it's going to get shipped to our Azure data centers and automatically transfer the data on the servers that you need that data to be restored. For small and medium workloads, we currently rely on SQL Server Migration Assistant, where we have two options. Client side, it's quite simple. Reading the data from Oracle, passing through SSMA, and pushing it to your SQL target. On the server side, we run some agent jobs on the SQL Server side, and the data is streamed directly between your Oracle source and your Azure SQL or SQL target. I've said a few things about these tools. Don't worry about the names. It took me a while to remember all these names. Let's have a look and see how you can actually leverage them. Quick questions. Quick question. Are you familiar with SQL Server Migration Assistant for Oracle? Has anybody used it? So let's see what we can actually do. The concept of SQL Server Migration Assistant is built on top of the project. So the first step is to create a migration project. And within that migration project creation, you would need to choose your target. The reason why you would need to do that is related to the optimizations that we do behind the scene. We optimize the conversion if you're going to SQL 2012 in a way which is different than the way that we are optimizing the conversion when we go to Azure SQL DB or to manage instance. So that's the part that has to be sort of established at the project level. And then I need a name for it. Do I need to zoom in? Perfect. So this is my, let's say, happy demo, hopefully. So this is my project. And it takes a few seconds for the project to be initialized. Well, it's already done, faster than a few seconds. The next step is to connect to my source. And here I have Oracle. In terms of drivers, we provide free drivers. SQL Server Migration Assistant has the ODP.NET built in. So Oracle Data Provider for .NET, it's already built in within SSMA. You don't need to download it and configure it and install it manually. You also have the option to use the OLEDB provider and ODBC driver. In the connection mode, you have three options. The first one is the standard mode, like the interface, where we ask you for the server IP, port, SID, and then the username and password. You can go for TNS names as well, or in the connection string mode, where you can use the documented properties of the driver to build your own connection string. So for today, I'm just gonna go for the standard mode because it's the way it is the simplest. Right now, I'm just gonna input the password. And I hope I got it right. I hope the connection is gonna work. So now I'm trying to reach one of the servers that's sitting in our subscriptions. And the next step is gonna be choosing the schemas that you want to convert. And you see, we've created a lot of schema here that's gonna help us for the testing process and the things that we need to do. So you can load all user objects if you want to, or you can choose a certain schema to be loaded. Once you click OK, we are going to start reading the properties. So we don't read anything related to the data. Everything it's about the metadata, definition, system views. How long is it going to take? It depends on the performance of your networking as well as the performance of your source machines. So on the tool side, we are not bottleneck because we are just launching the queries and waiting to get the data set so we can build we can build our local model. And I don't want to make you wait because it's already late today. So I have a project which is connected. It's live right now to the Oracle server where I preloaded the HR schema, and I've connected as well to my target. You can also work offline. You can bring the data. You can connect once to Oracle, bring the data within your project, save the project, and work in offline mode. The reason behind it is, or the explanation is the fact that we built a local metabase both for source and the target. So the object that you're going to bring from Oracle are going to be stored in your project it's a gzip format in the structure of an XML. And the same is going to be done for the target as well. So that's cool because you need to connect only once to your Oracle server and bring the data. Now, the first step that I want to do right now is that I want to find out if I have any issues on the assessment side. So if I would like to convert the schema right now, what would be the things that work and do not work? And if this project was not saved locally and it's connected live to the source, it's going to execute several queries to bring the required metadata, the high level or low level detail for the objects in order to get the conversion statistics. And that may take a little bit depending on the performance of your source. So I'm running a 2-core machine. Don't expect too much. I think it's already above my expectations in terms of performance. This is the report. So this is an HTML report. It's pretty cool. You can also drill down at the object level. So here I just created some errors. For example, I have a parsing error on the syntax of the creation of the store procedure. So Oracle doesn't enforce the parsing of the object on object creation. You can create objects which do not parse, but it will mark them as invalid. So I have a few invalid objects here that need to be fixed. The conversion which is being successful, that's the coolest part here is that I have the SQL source, I have the converted P-SQL. So this is my original P-SQL, and I have a side-by-side comparison with the converted P-SQL. Besides this, I also have some details here about the object conversion. If you're really familiar with parsers, with converters and parsers and grammars and everything else, you will have a sort of a very detailed explanation of how many expressions list, how many create statement, basically all the tokens that we identified and that we tried to convert. And I can do this at a high level, a procedure, and we have this nice charts where I see, well, I had 1 objects automatically converted, which is 25%, and 3 objects that were not automatically converted from the procedural space. A manual conversion time estimation is 3 hours. It's very hard to estimate the manual effort. One example is this one. In order to fix this, all I need to do is just delete the HR part. So it's not going to take 1 hour, but we have some categories. We don't assume and we don't pretend to have it accurate. It is an estimation of the manual time. And then I can even look, I can go a little bit lower to the details. And these are the table details. This is the overview with the warning on the conversion. And here I have the object conversion details as well. I can look into the view section. Well, jobs table is converted successfully. Everything is green. And here I can see messages for all objects, or I can see messages just for the current object. And that's a cool part because when I'm scrolling through the tree, I can have a look at for example, only at the errors related to the objects. So what's with these three categories? Errors are things that, is it an issue in the tool or what happened? Well, errors are things that we can't manually convert. Either because we had an error in parsing, either because we don't have a conversion logic, or it requires manual intervention. So those are things that you need to read about, or you need to manually fix. If you decide not to fix them, you can still deploy the code, but the resulting code is going to be commented out. So basically, you'll have this code commented out, so the object won't be there. Warning are things that let me see if I have any warning on all objects. Yeah, warning are things that we automatically converted, but you may want to have a look on it, like the number data type, the precisions that we use to convert from number data type to SQL data type. Make sure you are aware about the mapping and the conversion. Another thing is read-only. So here we had a view that had a read-only attribute. The read-only attribute cannot be converted because it doesn't exist in SQL Server. So while we have the same functionality in terms of view, we cannot convert that attribute. Is that a big issue? Well, that's something that you may want to decide. From my perspective, no, it shouldn't affect your project at all. This is an HTML report. You can create several HTML reports. They are stored on the disk within the same location as your project. It's pretty easy to drill through this. And behind the scenes, if you want to know a little bit about the internals of the converter, we create an HTML file basically for each object with a GUID. And then we have a main index.html that wraps it up and sort of presented in hierarchical structure. Let's proceed. The next step. So I've been through the assessment. I understand what's going on right now. What is the assess path? Now I want to convert. So in the conversion phase, you can either go to this, let's say to the table level and say, I want to convert just this object, this local object to this SQL local object, or I can say, well, I want to convert everything. Another part that you can do here is you can add statements. And you can add statements, ad hoc statements, something like select star from HR.employees. Or you can add statements. This is the right button. You can add statements from files. And here you just need to load the .sql PL/SQL files, and we'll be able to convert them as well. Good. So let's say we have this. We have the HR schema. So let's just try a conversion, because we've talked about conversion. And there's a simple button, convert schema, that you have here. And the conversion is going to take a little bit of time here. It was pretty fast. As you can see, it converted to, I have an SSMA POC database, and I did a mapping of schema to schema. So it created an HR schema. And the HR schema, so I did just the statements. I think I didn't select everything, so maybe that's why it was so fast. I was impressed, but yeah. Let's see, convert schema. Let's try that again. Yes. And here I get the warnings that some of the objects are invalid. And these are the objects that have the parser issue in Oracle. So Oracle marks them as invalid. So I'm going to skip, I'm going to continue. And I'm going to get a message saying, you know what, the statement one already exists. Do you want to overwrite it? And I'm going to do this for all the objects. And during this conversion, I'll have the errors. Let me take out the warnings. We already discussed about the warnings a little bit. The errors about unparsed SQL and trigger not found in the parse tree, which are mainly syntax errors. There might be the case that you are not experiencing syntax errors, but you are experiencing actual conversion errors. So, for example, this one is attributed read-only can only be converted with read-only. So every error message has a number. And if you look at this number, we also try to document in detail some of these errors, like what is the Oracle functionality and feature for number, and why it may cause data loss. So you may want to look them up. We'll try to include some of them in the SSMA documentation. Even if you don't, it's pretty easy to have a comparison in the tool itself. So in the upper part, we have the source, which is the Oracle region ID number, which was mapped to region ID float 53. That's the precision that we try to map number to make sure that we don't cause data loss, but you still need to look at the data types and sort of validate that. And we have a feature which is called tester that you can use later on to validate the migrated data. The way it works is going to do a hash on the source, a hash on the target, and compare two hashes for data rows. It can also compare store procedure and function execution. So there are different things that you can do. And the way it does it is you provide the parameters values. It executes the store procedures and the function and also compares the output. So in order not to alter the data that you already have in your tables, it's going to create a sort of backup tables and it's going to run the store procedure and functions on those backup tables. So the tester functionality, it is pretty powerful and can help you validate the data post-migration. If you're not happy with the default mapping that the tool does, you have lots of options here. You can do type mapping at column as well as local variables. You can modify any existing type mapping, or you can add your own type mapping if you wish to. We do partition tables as well if your table is partitioned, and here you can do the table space mapping between Oracle and the SQL table spaces as well as file groups. There are tons of options in terms of global settings for logging. So you have different debugging levels. In my machine, of course, is debug by default because I need to look into things. And you can also define your log file path. Another interesting option here is the project settings. And here you will have the general part where you can control the way these conversions act or result by making decision on convert count functions to count big functions, the conversion of these null in replace function calls, the cast of row number expression as integers, the default schema mapping. And here I'm doing a schema to schema. That means Oracle schema to SQL schema, but you can also do Oracle schema to a SQL database. A great feature that we have in SQL Server Migration Assistant is the Fixed Advisor. The Fixed Advisor allows you to sort of leverages, it doesn't allow, it most of leverages is a machine learning algorithm that leverages the corrections that you made in a place. So let's say you have a store procedure that's not automatically converted because it has hr.schema name.object name. If I have that in 2000 places, and I fix it in one place, Fixed Advisor will be able to pick it up and suggest following the same pattern for the other occurrences of the issue. So it can come in hand in leveraging the manual effort. There are also different object conversions things that you can do, and also emulation functions. For some of the SQL, we don't have a one-to-one mapping between Oracle functions and SQL functions, or between SQL functions and Oracle functions or functionalities. So in this case, we also sometimes deploy CLRs to mimic and simulate that functionality. The tool itself is pretty powerful, so you have a lot of options and a lot of things that you can configure and test. One other important aspect is the deployment of the schema. So let's say I'm done with this, with the conversion. I'm fixing. I'm happy with the converted objects. Now I can deploy those objects to the database. So I can do individual level deployment at object level, just synchronize with database, or I can deploy the entire schema. And in this case, I'm going to click synchronize with database. And I have a comparison between the local metabase, which is here stored in my project, and the objects that exist on SQL Server side. And here I'm pretty lucky, like I have no objects found. If I have similar objects on the SQL side, I'll have the ability to override them. So clicking OK. And at this point, the schema is deployed to my SQL Server. What's left? Well, I have the schema, but I also need to bring in the data, no? We talked about a little bit later on options on how you can move the data. In today's demo, I'm just going to look for the simplest part for me, which is moving the data through SQL Server Migration Assistant. It's not the most optimized, but it works well for small to medium workloads. So if you want to optimize or customize your migration process, you also have the ability to save it as a SSIS package. And you can customize that package, add to it, and run it at your own choice. I'm going to use the client-side migration. So let me see if I remember the password. And yeah, Windows authentication it is. That's how I don't have to remember 2 passwords. And we have our own data migration engine, which is built within SSMA. It went pretty fast. And the information that I have here, it's related to the source, the target, total number of rows, and migrated number of rows, as well as the duration. If there's a difference between total number of rows and migrated rows, it can be generated by the fact that when I started the migration, the database was still in production. So we do a select count before we start the migration, and then we do a select count on the target. If there is a difference between these two, most of the time it's because inserts have happened in between and we migrated those rows, or deletes have happened in between and those rows did not get moved to the target. This is the offline data movement capability. You also have the other options that we sort of went through. For the database side, SSMA sort of covers a lot of conversions and can help you automate as well as move the data. But we've mentioned applications as well, because databases don't live by their own. So what can we do about the applications? In Visual Studio Code, you have an extension which is called Data Access Migration. If I could type, yeah, this is the right one. Data Access Migration Toolkit. That's able to identify the SQL queries from your files, as well as the data catalog APIs. The data access APIs are valid just for Java code. We support different file types. You can read all about it. We've also documented. So let's see how it actually works. I have here just a very, this is like very basic application. I would say first year. Now, when I was young, it was first year of university. Now it's first year of high school. But yeah, things evolve over time. So this is just a connection string to my Oracle instance, and then I'm gonna run a query. Well, the query is here. So I'm going to use the prepare statement API to build that query and send it then for execution with execute query to the Oracle side. So if I want to have a look at, well, I want to migrate this to Azure SQL or even Postgres. So I need to have a look at my code. and identify those data access points. I need to modify the connection strings. I need to make sure that the methods that I'm using here are valid for SQL as well or for .NET. We have 3 dialects: Oracle for PLSQL queries, IBM DB2 for SQL PL queries, and of course, SQL Server. You can use these applications for SQL to SQL migrations or SQL to Azure SQL. The extension covers all 3 of them. So today we are going to use the Oracle one. It is pretty fast. I don't have tons of files here. The information that you get, which can be HTML or JSON, you can also save it as a JSON. You have this option here. It's gonna highlight the driver that I'm being used. So I'm using the GBC theme client, the languages and the connectors being used. And then I have a summary, the connection string that needs to be modified to point to the new database. So it already picked up my connection string within the code. So if I'm going to click on this one, it's going to get me to the definition of, here it is, to the definition of my connection string within my code. Another useful information that I have is the data access APIs. I review differences in database behavior on these APIs. And one of them is the prepare statement that I was using right here to build my select statement and send it to the database. There's also other things being used, SQL connection created using get connection. So if you're gonna get that, then you can use the get connection to connect to SQL as well. And another quite cool part is the identification of the actual PL SQL queries. So if I'm going to click on that, well, I'm here already. It identified with high confidence the PL SQL queries that I was building from my application. We have 3 levels of confidence because this is sort of a text-based algorithm as well. So we have low confidence, where we can identify just certain keywords, medium confidence, and the high ones. From my experience with the extension, almost all of the high confidence items have been actual PL SQL queries. Well, we also have some low confidence. Let's see, some low confidence queries, but these are not. Some of them are not really query, where we find just a certain word. So, what can we do with this HTML? Well, the first, if you are a fan of scripting, I would just save it, or development, I would just save it as JSON. You can use PowerShell to extract, and I have my own PowerShell to extract the ad hoc queries, the PL SQL queries being built from the application, and then parse them. I invoke SSMA from command line and convert them to T-SQL queries. That's just my idea of automating the query conversion coming from applications. You can process the JSON the way you see it fit for your application or for your organization or customer needs. Any questions before going back to the slides? So this was the fun part. This was the demo part, which surprisingly worked this evening. Now let's get back to PowerPoint. I promise I won't bore you with tons of PowerPoints, but I just want to highlight a few things. SSMA can be run in console mode for automation as a separate application, and that's how I actually built my own PowerShell script to extract the PL SQL queries and then run SSMA in command line with input for those files. You can use it for parallel schema conversion, as well as, of course, if you have a high number of schemas to convert. On the application side, we sort of went through the tool. There's one part that I want to highlight is the decision matrix. It's not set in stone. When we talk about Oracle application, I see 3 big categories: ERPs, like PeopleSoft, which are tightly coupled with the database. And here, although we can convert the Oracle objects easily with schema conversion, there isn't much that we can do for the application side. So this type of application would be better fit for a lift and shift and running them in VMs in Azure. There are other different type of workloads of custom-built applications that resides within a customer development center or within customer teams. And that's the part where it's not, well, it isn't that difficult to re-architect, or it's a little bit easier to get support for a different relational engine. And the third category that I would see are applications provided by third parties. So you have an application provider, and that application provider usually supports, in some cases, multiple database engines. It's worth checking sometimes if Azure SQL or SQL Server is among them. That can make your life really easy. Or we can work together with the ISV provider. We can work together with the application provider to streamline and make sure that the application is compatible with the Azure SQL targets. Data Access Migration Toolkit is the tool that we have in, and we recommend for the conversion of the code. It's not going to be one button fix it all. It's going to sort of highlight the points on the connection strings as well as dynamic SQL. We already went to the demo on the Data Access Migration Toolkit because I had the tools side by side, although on the slides they're a little bit different. I didn't want to switch between the slides and the screens too often. Oracle to SQL is one of the migration paths, and those are the tools and the things that we can do in that space. Another very probable migration path is Oracle to Azure Postgres. And here we have, in terms of tools, we have several options. For the assessment part on Azure Marketplace, you can find one of our partner tools, which called DMAP Oracle to Azure Postgres Migrations. It's from Newt Global. In order to streamline the data movement, well, we have we can leverage Stream as well. And for the conversions part, we have Ora to PG. I know tools can be, especially from our side, and at this point, tools can be really diverse, and sometimes you need a guide to find the guides. We also have an Oracle to Postgres migration guide. It's more than 300 pages. I would definitely recommend using Control F to find what you're looking for. It addresses the compatibility as well as Ora to PG automatic conversion. So for each and every automatic conversion that happens from Oracle to Postgres, we have a very high level, sometimes more detailed documentation within this migration guide, as well as proposals to remediate that. And of course, last but not least, we have the large ERP systems that are not going to be easily migrated, neither from the database or application side from an ERP directly into PaaS. So in order to cover those, we are looking at Oracle to infrastructure as a service, so running it in a VM in Azure. We try to sort of define the steps that you need to go through from the assessment, design, deploy, and of course evolve, because it's not always simple. I would say one of the key inputs in this process is the Oracle AWR report that would give us a pretty good idea on the IOPS memory and CPU resources and thresholds that we would need to provision in Azure as well. Documentation is also available. We don't have a lot of tools in the Oracle to Azure VM side, but what we are trying to build right now for the future is a unified experience and sort of group all these functionalities in a simple experience, in a simple way. We already have database schema conversion toolkit in Azure Data Studio, and we hope to bring the rest of the conversion path there in the future as well. When it comes to Oracle Infrastructure as a Service, most of the machines that we see being used in this migration path are the DE and, of course, M series. We've seen even 416 CPUs being used. IOPS is a big requirement. And we have some documentation as well as best practices white paper available on GitHub and also on our public community space and documentation space. The migration journey itself is not done once you have converted and deployed the data. You still need to monitor it, you still need to optimize it, and also correctly and successfully redirect or redeploy applications to your target. I would even add another bullet here, and that would be the training, because we have a lot of people coming with an Oracle background or even other relational database engine backgrounds, but are not very familiar with the Azure SQL or capabilities of the engines or capabilities of the platform. So that's one of the area and the bullets that I would also add is training on the target platform and getting started with the basic functionalities and the sort of tasks that need to be performed. I'm here representing a team. It's a team of program managers and cloud solution architects that's spanning across Oracle to SQL, Oracle to Postgres, and Oracle to infrastructure as a service. They might not be in the meetup with me, but they are contributing to the products that we build every day. So I just wanted to put a face to the names of the people who are working in this space. That being said, I'm all done. I hope it's giving you an overview of the capabilities and the automation that you can leverage when migrating from Oracle to Azure. The idea that I want to transmit is that all three, all even four, if you want to go to Cosmos DB, migration paths are possible. And we are trying to also streamline the tools experience and in the future have a single pane view for these migrations.